Now, saints, before we go on to chapter 12 of the book of Revelation, I hadn't finished. We have not finished because we went to the seventh trumpet, and I told you how the trumpets correspond exactly with the bowls of wrath. They're all one thing. And in the seventh trumpet, we saw that the kingdom of heaven came and Christ reigned. It was the end, the fulfillment of the trumpets. It had been finished. The trumpets were done. The messages to the church were done. And it ended up with Christ reigning. And now let's go look at the seventh bowl in Revelation 16:17. And the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." Remember the seventh trumpet, it said it was done. The messages to the church, and it went straight to Christ reigning because it had been fulfilled. Now we have the seventh bowl of wrath, the fulfillment of these things. As the bowls of wrath are poured out upon the world and the unbelieving and the kingdom of the beast at the end of the tribulation. And it says, and he poured his bowl out upon the air. What's that talking about? We have to go to Ephesians 2, 1 and 2. Ephesians 2, verses 1 and 2. And you were dead in your trespasses and sins. In verse 2, in which you formerly walked according to the course of this world. Previously, you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of the disobedient, referring to the evil, referring to Satan, referring to the world, referring to the unsaved. And that's why it says here, in the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, upon those, according to the prince of the power of the air, according to Satan. This is the end, fulfillment of Satan's kingdom, of Satan ruling, of Satan coming to power. And if you go to verse 18, and as it said at the end of the seventh trumpet, do you remember this? And there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder, and there was a great earthquake, such as there had not been since man came upon the earth. So great an earthquake was it, and so mighty. Again, you got those on the broad road of destruction telling you here's another ungodly, unbelievable disaster going on. No, this is the end of the wrath. This is the end and the fulfillment of those things. What's this talking about? Going right back to the earthquake that comes from the asteroid hitting. You can look at those documentaries again, go back and check them. If even a moderate to slightly smaller size asteroid hits the earth, it will cause a giant earthquake, an unbelievable earthquake. And that's what this is referring to. Since man came up on the earth, this will be the biggest earthquake ever caused by that asteroid hitting. That's what it's going back to. And in verse 19, and the great city, Babylon, we talked about Jerusalem being one of the two great cities. Here's the other great city, Babylon. And Babylon was split into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell. I told you, and we're going to see soon where this asteroid's going to hit, what's going to happen, and the great city that will be there where the asteroid hits will be split into three parts. And the nations of the world will fall because they're all intertwined, especially nowadays. We're all one. It's all making one government, one people, and one of the most powerful and influential and needed kingdoms falls, it will cause all the nations to fall. And you will see that shortly. And Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. See, this is the final, this is the outcome of the asteroid hitting, the wrath of God upon the ungodly at the end of the tribulation. And again here too, we read this earlier about the asteroid hitting. And in verse 20 it says, and every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. It's not talking about worldwide. It's not talking about a second round of everything being flattened on Earth. It's referring again to that asteroid where it hits off the coast. Every island there will disappear as it hits there. Of course it will if an asteroid hits there. And the mountains in that nation around the area of the asteroid will all be leveled. And in verse 21, and huge hailstones, about 100 pounds each, came down from heaven upon men, and men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, because its plague was extremely severe. Like I said, as that plume rises up into the higher atmosphere with the rocks and the debris from the ocean and the asteroid and the salt water and this acid and sulfur and nuclear waste and waste from the cities is all blown into the air. It'll rain down upon men, and they'll blaspheme God. And that's the result of these asteroids and these ungodly people. They blame God. They hate God. But it's going back to the same thing. And now I wanted to bring you to one other thing before we moved to chapter 12. And that is where we were reading that and seeing how God has turned to the Jews. I want to show you something here, that when the church started, Christ was the chief cornerstone, and the 12 apostles were the foundation. And that was all from Israel. And then God turned to the Gentiles and let us be built up upon this temple, this living temple, not made of hands, that he's building. He allowed the Gentiles to come in, and we are been built up along the sides and building this temple up, but the top is not put on. Do you remember what we read in Zechariah? In Zechariah 4:7, and it said, and he will bring forth the top stone with shouts of grace, grace to it, talking about topping off, crowning the temple. These Jews that turned to him as the Israelis, as the Hebrews, the Jews were the foundation of the church, and we were built up upon that. The crowning glory, the top of the temple, the last stone put upon it will be the Jews. The Israelis, as they turn to God in the last half of the tribulation, but they will pay a very high price for that. And look at what it says here in Ephesians 2 again, chapter 2 again, but in verses 19 through 22. So then, you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household. Verse 20, having been built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ, Jesus himself being the cornerstone. 21, in whom the whole building is being fitted together and is growing into a holy temple in the Lord. This is God's temple, not made with hands, not the one that Jewish men are going to try to do to please God, and the Antichrist will be taking it over. No, this is God's temple, not made with hands. And in verse 22, in whom you also are being built up into a dwelling of God and of the Spirit. And as we saw in Zechariah 4:7, and he will bring forth the top stone with shouts of grace, grace to it. What God is doing here in the end of the tribulation, in the end of time, in the last 3.5 years of the tribulation, he's going to now put the top, the crown on his temple. And he's going back to the Jews, back to Israel, back to the Hebrews. And they will be the crowning glory. And they will pay a super high price, as we're going to see. The Christians, the few Christians that are left in the world and the Gentiles and these Jews, they will be the crowning glory of this temple of God, but they will pay a high price, a price you were worried about paying by going into the tribulation. But you went into the first half of the tribulation and you were just prepared, you were just cleansed. These are going into the last half of the tribulation, and they will pay a price with their life, but they will be the crown, the top, the glory of the temple of God.